Names and identifying details have been changed in this retelling to protect the victims, their families, and the integrity of ongoing investigations. On a quiet winter afternoon in Maryland, a day like any other would spiral into a nightmare that would shake a community to its core. At approximately 3:00 p.m. on Thursday, December 8th, emergency responders received a frantic call from a local convenience store in the White Oak area of Montgomery County. A man had entered the store, seemingly browsing for a moment before a sudden confrontation turned deadly. The victim, a 61-year-old store clerk named Albert W. in this account, was struck multiple times by gunfire after a brief but violent altercation. Witnesses described a surreal calm in the killer's actions, a man who, after pulling the trigger, calmly left the store holding a bottle of iced tea. Within minutes, 911 calls flooded in. First responders rushed to the scene, and the clerk was pronounced dead despite immediate efforts to save him. This was not just a random act of violence. The suspect had a history of aggressive behavior in the neighborhood, repeatedly confronting staff outside the store and making threats that had been reported to police on prior occasions. Yet, no one anticipated the horror that would soon be uncovered in his own home. Investigators quickly traced the suspect to a nearby apartment complex. Surveillance footage showed him entering the building minutes after the shooting, unhurried and composed. What police discovered inside would transform this case from a tragic shooting into a far more disturbing investigation. In the suspect's apartment, officers found the decomposed body of a young woman, Denise M., 8.5 months pregnant. She had been dead for approximately 2 months, and the autopsy confirmed she had been shot multiple times. Denise had been in a relationship with the man now in custody, and her unborn child, a boy they planned to name Ezekiel, had also perished. This dual tragedy revealed a life steeped in instability. Both Denise and the suspect had previously experienced homelessness and relied on social assistance programs. Investigators would learn that a pattern of volatile arguments, unresolved conflicts, and a deep mistrust of authority had culminated in a lethal combination. For law enforcement and the community alike, this case had become more than a murder investigation. It was a window into the unraveling of 2 lives and the innocent child caught in the crossfire. As investigators combed through the evidence from the convenience store shooting, a chilling realization began to take shape. The man they had in custody, Tory M., was not just a local troublemaker. He was living with a secret so grim that it defied comprehension. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex showed him entering and moving through the building with a casual detachment, a stark contrast to the violence he had just committed. Inside the apartment, the officers were met with the stench of decay and the sight of neglect. The young woman they discovered, Denise M., had been dead for weeks, her body showing clear signs of multiple gunshot wounds. She had been carrying Ezekiel, the couple's unborn child, and both had been lost to a cruelty that had been hidden in plain sight. The discovery sent shockwaves through the team. This was no isolated crime of impulse. It was a prolonged horror, a tragedy that had unfolded behind closed doors while the world outside went on unaware. Investigators soon uncovered evidence that Tory M. had continued living in the apartment alongside the decomposing body, surrounded by weapons and spent shell casings. It was a scene of unsettling normalcy, an everyday environment transformed into the setting of an unthinkable crime. The timeline was horrifying. Denise's death occurred in early October, and Tory M. had carried on with life as usual for months before the fatal confrontation at the store. Interviews with neighbors and associates painted a picture of a man struggling with delusions, anger, and a warped sense of justification. Tory M. claimed that he had been trying to protect Denise, to shelter her from perceived threats, even as he left her lifeless in his apartment. The contradictions in his story, the dissonance between his calm demeanor and the violence he committed, forced investigators to tread carefully, piecing together motives while confronting the stark reality of the bodies before them. The duality of this case, the immediate, visible horror of the gas station shooting, and the hidden, lingering tragedy of Denise and her unborn child, presented law enforcement with a challenge unlike any other. The community, still grappling with the sudden loss of Albert W., now faced the incomprehensible scale of what had transpired behind the walls of an apartment in Silver Spring. The case was no longer just about identifying a perpetrator. It had become a study in human darkness, control, and the consequences of unchecked aggression. As law enforcement dug deeper into the life of Tori M., a troubling pattern began to emerge, a life marked by instability, desperation, and repeated brushes with the law. Investigators discovered that both he and Denise M. had faced homelessness at various points, relying on social assistance programs and temporary housing to survive. Their relationship had been turbulent from the start, punctuated by cycles of reconciliation and separation, affection and aggression. Yet even within this chaotic pattern, there had always been a thread of connection. Denise was pregnant, carrying a child that neither she nor Tori could ignore. Police interviews, family accounts, and surveillance footage slowly revealed the escalating tensions between them. Tori M. described efforts to protect Denise, to bring her back to Maryland from Virginia, to shield her from programs he believed were exploiting her. He recounted a series of arguments, minor altercations, and physical struggles, moments that, in hindsight, were harbingers of the violence to come. His recollections were inconsistent, sometimes contradictory, and often self-serving, as he attempted to frame his actions as reactive rather than premeditated. Neighbors, friends, and associates painted a complicated picture. To some, Tori was a troubled but not inherently violent man. To others, he was unpredictable, prone to sudden outbursts, and increasingly isolated. Denise, meanwhile, was described as cautious but loving, a woman trying to navigate the precarious balance of a relationship with a man who was both familiar and frightening. CCTV footage captured the last moments she was seen alive, standing quietly in an elevator, separated from the world and from anyone who could intervene, following Tori M. with a mix of hesitation and resignation. That elevator ride marked the end of her freedom and the beginning of the investigation's most haunting questions. Digital evidence revealed even more chilling details. Following her death, Tori M. had searched for instructions on how long it takes for a body to decompose, how to dispose of a corpse without being noticed, and even how to plead insanity in court. These searches suggested a mind wrestling with guilt, fear, and planning, painting a picture of a man capable of both reflection and denial, horror and calculation. Yet despite this, he continued to live alongside the body for weeks, as if normal life and unimaginable death could coexist within the same walls. The investigators were forced to confront a difficult truth. This was not a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of rage. It was a convergence of neglect, obsession, and escalating violence. Tori M.'s prior behavior, the previous trespassing incidents at the store, and the mounting evidence from his own environment suggested that the eventual tragedy was foreseeable, if not inevitable. And yet, what had driven him to the final act of violence at the convenience store remained partially obscured, hidden behind a mixture of fear, rationalization, and refusal to fully admit his culpability. For the community, this revelation was devastating. The murder of Albert W., the 61-year-old store clerk, was already shocking, but the discovery of Denise M.'s body, pregnant, alone and left to decay, added a depth of horror that words struggled to convey. The dual nature of these crimes forced investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew about danger, domestic conflict, and the way ordinary lives can hide extraordinary darkness. The narrative turns inward, exploring the psychology of the perpetrator, the fragility of his victims' lives, and the intertwining of circumstance, choice, and fatal consequence. It becomes clear that understanding the why behind the crimes requires navigating a labyrinth of personal history, relational dynamics, and moral failure. The lines between victim and perpetrator blur, and the investigators must confront not only the evidence before them, but the uncomfortable truths about the human capacity for violence when love, fear, and desperation collide. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the victims, their families, and the integrity of the investigation. By early December, the investigation had reached a critical stage. Law enforcement had a suspect in custody, but the full scope of his actions was only beginning to surface. Tori M. had confessed to the shooting at the convenience store, but the discovery of Denise M.'s body transformed the case from a violent public crime to a deeply personal, chilling tragedy. Police officers entered his apartment, navigating the oppressive stench, the clutter, and the unsettling evidence of weeks spent living alongside a dead body. What they found challenged conventional understanding of crime: a perpetrator who coexisted with his victim, who planned and yet procrastinated, who displayed both cunning and detachment. Investigators meticulously documented the scene, cataloging weapons, spent shell casings, and the traces of daily life that Tori M. had allowed to continue amidst the horror. Every detail, from a misplaced sword to the remnants of Denise's last days, became critical. Interviews with neighbors, building staff, and associates painted a portrait of a man increasingly detached from reality, yet aware enough to attempt to conceal evidence and manipulate perception. Digital forensics revealed a disturbing trail: internet searches on decomposition, legal defenses, and attempts to evade accountability. Each search added weight to the suspicion that this was no impulsive act, but rather the result of calculated decisions combined with emotional volatility. The investigators faced a daunting challenge: establishing a timeline, corroborating statements, and untangling the complex web of domestic conflict. Tori M.'s recounting of events was inconsistent, at times deflecting responsibility, and at others acknowledging only fragments of the truth. He rationalized his behavior with claims of self-defense, fear, and provocation, yet the physical and forensic evidence told a different story. The juxtaposition of his calm demeanor at the store shooting with the weeks of inaction in his apartment deepened the mystery, forcing law enforcement to confront the disturbing reality that some crimes are not fueled by impulse alone, but by sustained disregard for human life. Meanwhile, the families of both victims struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. The clerk's family grappled with the sudden, senseless loss of a loved one. Denise M.'s family faced an even more harrowing grief, compounded by the knowledge that her unborn child had also been murdered. The human cost of Tori M.'s actions extended far beyond the crime scene, leaving emotional scars that would linger indefinitely. Throughout Act 4, the investigation highlights the interplay between procedural diligence and human tragedy. Each new revelation, the autopsy confirming Denise's death weeks earlier, the timeline of Tori M.'s movements, the evidence left in plain sight, compounded the horror, illustrating the meticulous work required to untangle acts of violence from the chaotic lives they disrupt. It became clear that understanding the sequence of events was only part of the story. Understanding the psychological and relational forces at play was equally critical. The narrative reaches a point of grim clarity. Tori M. had committed acts that were both violent and deliberate, but the motives remained partially obscured behind layers of denial, fear, and mental instability. The investigator's task was no longer simply about solving a crime. It was about piecing together the final days of Denise M., understanding the chain of decisions that led to multiple deaths, and preparing the case for justice. The weight of evidence, combined with the haunting personal histories involved, ensured that the story would resonate far beyond the walls of the apartment, leaving the community and the families grappling with the unimaginable. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the victims, their families, and the integrity of the investigation. As the investigation transitioned into the courtroom, the magnitude of Tori M's crimes became starkly apparent. The legal proceedings would reveal not just the violence of a single act, but the sustained cruelty of a man who had taken life and allowed it to decay in his own home. The trial was a collision of evidence, emotion, and law, with prosecutors tasked with presenting a sequence of events so grim it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. The court learned of the convenience store shooting first, an unprovoked attack captured on security footage, showing the cold efficiency of a man who fired multiple rounds at an unsuspecting clerk. Witnesses described the scene with disbelief, a man who entered with a casual air, yet left behind a tragedy that would haunt a family forever. The prosecution highlighted the stark contrast between the public act of violence and the hidden, private horror unfolding in his apartment for weeks. Denise M., 8.5 months pregnant, lying dead, her child unborn and also a victim of homicide. Digital evidence became a central pillar of the case. Search histories revealed chilling calculations, inquiries into how long a body would decompose, methods for moving a corpse undetected, and even attempts to understand legal defenses such as insanity pleas. These findings painted a picture of deliberate planning layered over a personal, volatile relationship that had escalated into catastrophe. Tori M's own statements, inconsistently admitting certain acts while deflecting responsibility for others, underscored a psychological complexity that the court would grapple with throughout the proceedings. Defense attorneys argued that Tori M. suffered from schizophrenia and was not competent to stand trial. They sought to portray him as a man out of touch with reality, a narrative that clashed with the overwhelming physical and digital evidence. For the jury, the challenge was stark: weigh the reality of the crimes against claims of mental instability, while confronting the unimaginable human cost. The court heard testimony from family members, neighbors, and law enforcement, all recounting moments of fear, confusion, and horror. Each narrative added weight to the tragic story of a woman and her unborn child, whose lives were extinguished in the supposed safety of a home. The trial also exposed the deeply human element behind the crimes. Denise M. had been in a vulnerable state, relying on Tori M. for support while navigating the challenges of pregnancy, homelessness, and unstable social services. Her family's grief was compounded by the realization that her life, and that of her child, had ended at the hands of someone she trusted. The clerk's family, meanwhile, sought justice for a life abruptly and violently taken, a reminder that violence can strike both in public and behind closed doors. After months of testimony, evidence, and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Tori M. was found guilty not only of the shooting at the convenience store, but also of the murder of Denise M. and her unborn child. It marked a rare and chilling conviction, one that acknowledged the life of the unborn as equally sacred in the eyes of the law. Sentencing followed, and Tori M. was given terms that ensured he would not be eligible for parole until decades into old age, a punishment reflecting both the gravity of his actions and the impossibility of restitution for the families affected. The courtroom proceedings were stark and silent in their implications. Tori M. did not speak in his defense, nor did he attempt to offer explanation or apology during sentencing. The families of the victims left with no clear answer, only the formal acknowledgement of the crimes and the reassurance that justice had been delivered, however incomplete. The verdict closed one chapter of this story, but the resonance of the events, the calculated violence, the personal betrayals, the haunting indecision, would linger indefinitely, leaving an indelible mark on the community, the families, and anyone confronted with the depths of human cruelty. The focus shifts from investigation to accountability. The courtroom became a stage where evidence, human emotion, and law intersected, revealing the chilling consequences of actions that span months and cross the boundaries of public and private spaces. The case of Tori M. is not merely a story of murder. It is a reflection of the complexities of human relationships, the unpredictability of violence, and the enduring struggle for justice when confronted with incomprehensible acts of brutality. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the victims, their families, and the integrity of the investigation. Even after the gavel fell and Tori M. was sentenced, the ripples of his actions continued to affect every life touched by the tragedy. For the families of Denise M. and the unborn child, the courtroom's acknowledgement of guilt offered a small measure of validation, but it could never fill the void left by loss. Every anniversary, every holiday, every milestone that would have been shared with Denise and her child became a reminder of a life stolen too soon, a future that would never exist. The convenience store clerk's family faced a similar, relentless grief. Life had been permanently altered by a moment of senseless violence, and the normal rhythms of daily life, work, school, social gatherings, now carried the weight of that memory. The community, too, was forced to confront the fragility of safety. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about trust, about warning signs, about the terrifying realization that violence can emerge from the most familiar places: a home, a neighbor, someone you think you know. Investigators, while relieved that a conviction had been secured, carried their own burden. They had witnessed firsthand the consequences of untreated mental illness, domestic instability, and unchecked aggression. Each report, each piece of evidence, each testimony they collected was a stark reminder that prevention often comes too late, and that the systems designed to protect vulnerable people sometimes fail in ways that cannot be undone. In the months following the trial, social services and community groups attempted to address the gaps that had contributed to the tragedy. Workshops on domestic safety, mental health awareness campaigns, and outreach programs for expectant mothers were implemented. Yet, even as institutions worked to prevent future tragedies, the human toll remained. Memories of Denise, of her unborn child, and of a clerk taken in public view lingered in the minds of everyone involved. For Tori M., life behind bars became a stark reality, stripped of freedom and control. The world he had once inhabited, a world of manipulation, violence, and deception, was replaced by a regimented routine designed to contain him. In that isolation, there was no redemption, no reconciliation with the lives he had destroyed, only the weight of judgment and the slow passage of time. Ultimately, this story is a stark meditation on human frailty, on the dangerous intersections of trust and betrayal, love and violence, and the irreversibility of certain actions. The victims' families, though scarred, persevered, finding strength in memories, community, and each other. The public, confronted with the stark realities of violent crime, was reminded that evil often hides behind ordinary facades and that vigilance, empathy, and support systems are vital. While justice was achieved in a court of law, the emotional and societal consequences endure. The story of Tori M., Denise M., and the unborn child serves as both a warning and a reflection. That life is fragile, that violence leaves lasting echoes, and that every tragedy carries lessons, painful, haunting, but necessary, about the human condition and the responsibilities we owe one another in a world where the unthinkable can happen when we least expect it. Names have been changed to protect the victims, their families, and the integrity of the case, but the lessons remain universal, stark, and unforgettable.